Hi, everyone, and welcome again to another edition of Talking Story. And those of you who have watched some of the other videos know that Talking Story is something that we love to do in Hawaii. It's a way of engaging with one another and growing together. And I remember as a kid, being at the beach with my family, and it was just as much fun talking story on the beach as it was going into the water and getting to know one another. And if you've been watching any of these, you know that my guests have been persons from community of color, and their voices are really necessary for us to hear and to learn from. And of course, we want to get to know them and get to know what they're doing and their passions and what ignites their passions, especially as it relates to equity and social and racial justice. So my guest today, I'm so happy that he can join us, is Ray Valido. I actually met Ray through a podcast. I was listening to a friend's podcast, and Ray was one of the guests. And as I listened to him, I said to myself, I have to have him as one of my guests on these Talking Story episodes. Ray is working at the State Department in Washington, D.C., in the language services department. He is fluent in Spanish, Tagalog, which is Filipino, as well as Korean. And for a long, long time before he was in the State Department, he was a church liturgist and musician with the Catholic Church. And so he has a great passion for music as well. Ray and his husband, Mike, live in the beautiful state of Maryland. I haven't been to Maryland, but I've been to DC once, and beautiful area. So Ray, we are so happy you can join us today. And again, really, from the bottom of my heart, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Gerald. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. So Ray, I usually begin these interviews with a question for my guests because of what we've been through in this last year and a half with the pandemic and racial unrest and all that. How is your spirit? How are you doing these days?
That's a very good question. Thank you. This past year has really gotten me in touch with just how blessed and how privileged I am, and how blessed my husband and I are to have kind of gotten through. We're almost at the end of this pandemic, God willing, untouched relatively by COVID. We've had stable jobs and that have allowed us to work from home, something that we really realize that a lot of people have not been able to have. This past year has been a little bit tumultuous in terms of racial justice. It's hit me a lot personally. It's really gotten me to think. Even still, through all of that, I realize how much I've been blessed in my life and how much my family has been blessed. And I always try to remind myself, Ray, you got to keep that attitude moving forward.
Well, thank you. It's really been a tough year for all of us, and in the Asian American community in particular, it's been really tough.
Exactly.
So Ray, before we have you speak a little bit about what you're doing now, of course, people don't really know you. So I wonder if you could share with us about your growing up and your family and some of that. You have such a rich cultural background. And so I'd love for our community to hear about you, and how's that influenced the person that you are and the things that you're doing?
Okay, well, I may live in Maryland right now, but I am a California native. You can ask all of my friends here on the East Coast. I always tell everyone I'm a Californian still. That's kind of hard to get out of me, even though I've been here on the East Coast now for 12 years. I was born and raised in Southern California, just outside LA in Glendale. Both of my parents are Filipino immigrants, but they come from two different time frames of Filipino immigration. My dad belonged to the what's called the Manong generation, which was a generation of Filipino men, mostly from the northern part of the Philippines, that came to the West Coast in the first half of the 20th century as laborers. My dad first arrived in Tacoma, Washington, made his way down into California. He worked in the fields, as did many other manongs, manong being the Filipino, the Ilocano term for older brother. It's a term of respect. And he also fought in World War II in the army. He fought in Papua New Guinea. Few years had passed, and in 1967, the immigration laws had changed, and the second wave of Filipinos came, and that was the wave in which my mother came. She is from Manila. She studied at the University of the Philippines, and she came in 1967 and met my dad, who was among the group of Filipinos in Los Angeles that was welcoming all of these new Filipino immigrants. And they were married, and I was born and raised in Glendale. Went to public school my whole life, but was very devout Catholic. I'd go to church often with my mom, not just weekly, most often daily, very into Catholic devotions of praying the rosary, praying novenas, and a lot of stuff that are just very devotional parts of Catholic life. I also grew up a little bit of a language nerd. I liked learning different languages. My mother, interestingly enough, did not teach me Filipino, and my two parents could not speak the same dialect of Filipino. My father only spoke the language of the North, which was Ilocano, and my mom only spoke the language of the capital, which was Tagalog. So the language in our house was English. However, my mother came from a family that was Spanish speaking, and she valued Spanish immensely. And so she said, oh, no, don't try and learn Filipino. You need to learn Spanish. So with her help and with school, I was fluent in Spanish already by my teens. But I also lived in a neighborhood with a lot of other Asian immigrants. I studied Chinese a little bit, but I really did fall in love with the Korean language when I was an early teenager, and just I loved K-pop before it was a thing. We're talking the Korean pop singers of the mid-1980s. That was what I was playing on my cassette deck in my car when I first got my driver's license. When it came to searching for colleges, I applied and got into a couple of UCs as kind of like a backup plan, but I really had my heart set on going to seminary. So I applied to and got accepted to the seminary for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, College Seminary, St. John's Seminary College, which is in Camarillo, California, Ventura County. And I did my 4 years of undergrad there. And I graduated with a bachelor's degree in philosophy. And that's when I decided to leave. It was after my bachelor's degree, because at that point I had come out of the closet, and I realized that ordained ministry in the Roman Catholic Church was not going to be for me. So, yes.
Thank you for sharing about it. What a rich background, and to know that your mother was so influential in terms of languages, that's terrific. And so, speaking of languages, you are doing that kind of work right now in the State Department. Could you tell us more about your work with the State Department?
So I decided to go. So I had worked for several years first as a musician, and I can get into that a little bit. But in around 2006, 2007, I decided to make a career change. And up until that point, all of my education had either been in seminary, in philosophy or theology studies, or music. And I thought, oh my gosh, those aren't really big money earning careers, especially if you live in California.
Right.
So I thought, okay, what other skill set do I have, knowing that I'm going to need to go back to school? And well, it was languages. And a friend, just on a fluke, sent me a spam email that she got by this for this really good grad school in Monterey, California, called the Monterey Institute of International Studies. That's what it was called back then. Now it's called the Middlebury Institute of International Studies of Monterey. And it's a very famous school for the study of translation and interpretation. I applied and I got in, and I studied a master's degree in what is called Spanish translation and localization management. It was a 2-year program. I had also, so prior to starting this program, I had lived a few years in Madrid, Spain. My goal for with this master's degree was I wanted to go back to Madrid, and I wanted to go back and work in Madrid. However, in the middle of my program, somebody told me of this person who was coming out from Washington, D.C. looking for interns. And I thought, oh, I don't want to live in Washington, D.C. I ended up going to the interview, and he was from the State Department. And I got the internship. And then right after graduation, he offered me a job. So I moved out to Washington, D.C., and I've been working there in the translation and the interpretation office. Translation being the written word and interpretation being the spoken word. I work on the translation side, although I'm also a Spanish interpreter. I don't nearly do as much work in interpretation as I do in translation. Mm. And it's a great office because we support a lot of high profile offices in the federal government. My workday is very varied. I can deal with military documents. I can deal with doing a lot of typesetting in non-Roman scripts. So like if something needs to be typeset in Arabic, I do that, or in Chinese, I'll do that. I'll work sometimes in Filipino, I'll work sometimes in Korean. So I really am lucky to have found a job that's really a dream job for anybody who's a language nerd.
So the work that you all do in your office, it all has to do with international relationships and
well, when you come down to it, yes, it does. And that's also why I love this job and why I moved out for this job. Our office, we support the state, we're the State Department office for translation interpretation. We'll also support the White House, and we'll also support any federal agency. So I can do work one day that is of diplomatic nature, and I can do work the next day that could be the tourist brochure for the US Capitol. A federal agency, or the tourist brochure for the Botanical Garden here in DC. And, the next day it could be something for the Department of Treasury. So it just depends what lands on your desk on any given day.
How many people work in your department?
Well, we have about 20 on-staff linguists on the translation side and on the interpretation side. I'm a translation project manager, and there are about 20 of us as well. But we are supported by many contractors. And so therefore we can handle projects in about 140 language combinations.
Wow.
And there was one project a few years ago, I remember it was one document that was being translated into 44 languages.
Oh my goodness.
And no, I did not translate them into 44 languages at all. I actually worked linguistically on only one of those languages, but the rest of them I was either managing, doing the typesetting for it, coordinating with the translators and the reviewers. But it really got, I mean, you really needed to love looking at different documents and scripts you may not understand. And I'm always excited by that.
Now, you and I spoke a few weeks ago, and you mentioned to me that you've actually worked now under 4 presidential administrations. And when you said that, I was so curious about what it has been like to have worked under these 4 different presidents. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what it's been like for you?
Sure.
And for your department, of course, and for your department.
Sure. Well, when I did my internship, the Secretary of State was still Condoleezza Rice. And so therefore that was during George W. Bush's second administration. And then when I was hired, it was just at the beginning of the Obama presidency. What I still love about the way our government works is that you do still have a civil service that remains apolitical. So that way you have offices like ours that continue to exist after administration, after political parties change. And so there is a lot of continuity in the workforce. Of course, I've seen a lot of different things. When I was first working there, they were doing the Korean Free Trade Agreement. When I started arriving there, when I was hired to move to Washington, D.C. I remember President Obama had just named a new special representative to the Middle East. And one of his speeches I had worked with, the translation of that I had helped with. And then we had 4 years, well, we had 8 years of the Obama presidency, as everybody knows. And then we had a very different presidency with President Trump. And now another another big change with just this past year with the election of Joe Biden and our new Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken. Washington, D.C. is an exciting city. And in my opinion, everything just kind of revolves around politics. If you don't like politics at all, I would say this isn't the right city for you. And I kind of liken it to when I speak with my friends in Los Angeles, because I felt that when I lived in LA, Hollywood was something that a lot of people talked about. And then I lived in San Jose for several years, and tech was a big thing you talk about, you know, in the Bay Area. Well, here it's politics. It's politics, and it's, you know, it's hard to avoid talking about it, especially if you work in this administration. Of course, I have my own political convictions, as everybody does. And I'm happy to have worked, to have seen government at work and to be able to support a government through times when I personally was in agreement with the administration, and at times when I personally was very much opposed to the administration. And I will say in the past 13 years that I've been working here, it's gone to all of the extremes. So, and you can see that too. Now, of course, when I'm at work, I often like to say, we work in language. We don't set foreign policy, we translate it. And that's what I love about it. I mean, we're wordsmiths, we're lovers of language, and regardless of what you're translating, that excites me. It can be a speech with something I don't agree with, but still the language excites me.
That would be really interesting, translating something that you might not see eye to eye with. But it sounds really invigorating being where you are.
It It is. We're on the pulse of a lot of what's happening. There are some people that ask, well, what languages are you translating the most these days in your office? And I said, if you really want to know that, turn on the 6 o'clock news. Whatever the United States is getting involved with on a world scale, you can expect that, they'll be needing some help linguistically with that. Unless it's another English-speaking country. But if it's not another English-speaking country, we'll usually have some part linguistically in building those bridges of communication. And that is exciting.
Well, thanks for sharing about that. I know that when you and I spoke about this the last time too, I could feel your passion for the languages and for working in DC. And another one of your passions is music. And for a good long while, you were a liturgist and a church musician with the Catholic Church. And I know that was really important. So could you tell us what led you into music and especially to be a musician and liturgist with the Catholic Church?
Sure.
And in fact, you were in San Jose. You were in the Diocese of San Jose for a while.
For many years. Sure. Well, that goes back to when I was in the seminary. So as many good Filipino kids growing up in the United States, I had parents that pushed me to take piano lessons. So I went through my piano chops as a kid. I never became that great as a little kid. Enough to play a few pieces and everything. I started taking up the piano again just casually when I was in high school because I had some friends that were pianists. Then I went into the seminary. And in Roman Catholic seminaries, you're usually in the chapel 3 times a day. One for morning prayer, one for mass, and one for evening prayer. Sometimes on other days, maybe night prayer or some other rituals that will happen in the chapel. And my best friend in the seminary, before he had come into the seminary, he had worked as an organist. So he was at the piano or the organ every single day. And sometimes I'd shadow him. We'd play the instruments together when nobody was in the chapel. Well, in sophomore year, from one day to the next, he had left. Sometimes in the seminary, guys leave very abruptly, and sometimes you don't even know. But he had left. And the way I found out that he had left was somebody coming up to me and saying, "Oh, so Ray, I guess you're going to be at the piano more often." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, so-and-so left." And I said, "Oh, really?" So from that day on, I was playing morning prayer, mass, and evening prayer every day. And it was kind of like baptism by fire. I got better, and I started really enjoying it a lot. And by the time I was in my senior year, I was very heavily involved in music ministry. It was also at that time that as I had said, I came out of the closet to myself, to my family, and I had also fallen in love. And I left the seminary, and my first partner and I lived together. I became the director of music for an LGBT Catholic community in LA called Dignity Los Angeles. And Dignity is a nationwide organization of LGBTQ Catholics, not formally recognized by the Roman Catholic Church, but in existence nonetheless. And I was their director of music for about 2 years. And then I heard about this program in liturgical music at Santa Clara University. And I kind of wanted to leave LA. So I moved up to Santa Clara, and I went to that program, studied choral conducting, studied organ, studied liturgy, and I loved it. And I got heavily involved with the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of San Jose, Roman Catholic Diocese of San Jose. It's not an archdiocese. And I was director of music in several parishes in the San Jose Diocese. I had also directed music for one of the biggest Filipino churches in in San Jose. They had a Filipino mass every week that I played for.
Mm.
And at the height of my involvement in church music, I was playing up to 7 masses a weekend. So usually I most likely get a wedding or a funeral on Saturday. I do 2 masses on Saturday evening. That's 3. I do 4 on Sunday morning. And I usually try and keep Sunday evening free. If I didn't get a funeral on Saturday morning, maybe I'd do the Sunday evening mass as well. But I was playing a whole lot there. And then I moved to Madrid, Spain for a few years. I was also the director of music for the English-speaking Catholic Church for the Archdiocese of Madrid. And I worked there for about 3 years. So before I came back. And I came back to the United States again to work in another parish in Sunnyvale.
I want to get back to your time in the Catholic Church, but I'm curious about when you came out to your family, what that was like for you.
Well, my family is a very small family. My father passed when I was young. He was a lot older than my mother. As I said, he emigrated in the 1920s. And so he passed when I was a young teenager. So it was just me and my mom and my older brother. My mom is a very Filipino mom, and she was very sad about it. My mom loves me. I don't doubt that at all. And I know that my mom loves my husband. But in a very Filipino way, my mom is very embarrassed about the fact that I'm gay. And I know this because, a lot of my extended family doesn't know, or when they find out that I'm gay, because I'll tell them, or they'll find out from my Facebook, they'll say, oh, no wonder your mom has always been so hush-hush when we ask about you. But I find that that's very common among Filipino parents. And also, I think it's harder for Filipino parents when their children are as out as I am. I mean, I wear it on my sleeve. I'm very proud to be gay and Catholic. I'm very proud to be married to a wonderful man. And I'm very proud to get involved in LGBTQ activism. And it's one thing to be a gay Filipino kid that keeps it under tabs with your family. Well, that's the last thing I do about being gay. I feel very comfortable about it. I belong to a myriad of LGBTQ organizations, and I'm constantly posting about them on social media and constantly attending functions about that. And I think it's that type of, that level of being as comfortable with my sexuality as I am. I don't think my mom is there.
Mm.
So.
Yeah, I would say it's maybe more common, particularly in Asian families.
Yeah.
I want to go back again to your experience in Catholic Church. Now, you and I were talking about in our last conversation that in 2008 with the California Proposition 8, that really changed the dynamics. Of course, Proposition 8 was a proposition against same-sex marriages. And you had mentioned to me that it impacted you powerfully, especially in your relationship, in your employment in the Catholic Church. Could you tell us about that?
Sure. So when I moved up to San Jose, because in order to study at Santa Clara, I really had in mind that I would make a career out of church music, out of pastoral music in Roman Catholic parishes. And I was also very out of the closet. And whenever I would get hired as director of music or director of liturgy at a parish, I would always say in my interview, by the way, I'm gay. It's not as if I'm gonna make an issue of it in my daily job, because it really doesn't deal with it. But I'm never going to hide it. And if you have a problem with that, then this isn't the job. Then we're not a right fit. And I was never turned down during my interview in my interviews in San Jose because I said that. It wasn't long before I realized that a lot of the friends I was making in the Diocese of San Jose, who were also priests, they were also gay too. I moved in gay circles, in gay priestly circles, and I love that there's still, a lot of them are still my friends today. When there was discussion looming about this new proposition in California, Prop 8, which would define marriage between a man and a woman, I started seeing the writing on the wall and how the Roman Catholic Church in California was not only backing it, but kind of supporting it. And now in retrospect, I see that one of the drafters of it is the current Archbishop of San Francisco. And so he kind of helped draft Prop 8. And that really took a hit at me personally, because it showed me that my place of employment really was not going to stick up for me in terms of my rights. And that was kind of when I got to a crossroads in my career, and I thought, well, Ray, you're in your mid-30s. Are you going to keep on going down this path of church music in an environment that may not be that safe for you, or are you going to try something new? And that's when I decided to go to Monterey and to go to grad school, go back to grad school in Monterey. It turned out to be a good thing because Prop 8 passed in November 2008. I will never forget that. And I was still finishing up my degree in Monterey. But when Prop 8 passed, and I remember, I will never forget, this was a few weeks afterwards, and I just got done playing a mass in one of the churches in San Jose, one of 4 morning masses that day in that parish. And I also co-conducted the choir there. And I, of course, knew all the choir members. Anyways, I walked outside the church with some of the choir members, and we were talking. And this middle-aged couple, they said, "Okay, goodbye, Ray." And they walked to their car, and right smack dab on their bumper was a bumper sticker, "Vote yes on Prop 8." And I thought, oh man, even my own choir members would not support my rights as a gay man. And I thought, wow, this, I really need another alternative for work after I graduate from Monterey. And I think that was divine providence, because right before I graduated, I was offered a job in Washington, D.C. And I took it because I knew that if I didn't take that job, I didn't have any job prospects in California. And in order to continue a livelihood, I might fall back into the only thing I had known how to do at that point, which is church music. But that would be in a post-Prop 8 church. And I did not want to work in that environment, because it was basically the marriage equality that kind of set a new stage, in my opinion, for what it's like for an LGBTQ person to work in a Catholic church. It's become a lot more hostile to LGBTQ people, and only more so after I got married.
So have you been able to pursue any of your musical passions at all?
So that's been very complicated as well. I married a man who was also a Roman Catholic Church musician. And when we got married, he was fired from his job. I was also playing in the church where he was working at, and I was told I was no longer welcome. I was substitute pianist, organist in another church. I was told I was no longer welcome. I held on to a director of music position for a Catholic community here in Washington, D.C. for 6 years. That also ended when word got out to church hierarchy that I was married. So I miss playing. I play so infrequently nowadays. And that's twofold. I usually don't get asked anymore. And number 2, I don't feel comfortable in a lot of Roman Catholic places, even though I love the Roman Catholic liturgy. It's what I know the best. I live it and I breathe it. I know the music, I know the ritual. but sometimes it's just too hard to be in a Catholic environment. I'm saddened by homophobic homilies, homophobic sermons when I hear them. And I think that's a little too violent for me. And I don't think Sunday worship should be something violent. And so I usually just stay away.
You had mentioned your husband is also a musician, and he has an interesting story too. Do you think he'd mind if you shared a little bit about his journey?
Oh no, especially since he shares a lot of it on his public Facebook. My husband had also been in a Roman Catholic seminary. Our common faith was what drew us together when we first met. And he's quite an accomplished theologian and liturgist. He had headed up the largest organization for Catholic Church musicians in the country for over a decade, and his position there came to an end because of our marriage. After he was ostracized from the Catholic Church, he found a home in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. He also became the minister of music for that denomination's national church, which is right in downtown DC. And if you're ever in Washington, D.C., you must come to National City Christian Church. It's right in Thomas Circle. It has one of DC's largest pipe organs with more than 7,000 pipes. It is a magnificent instrument. He still manages the organ concert series there. My husband had also studied many years of theology. He has a doctorate in ministry from Catholic U. And so a few years after changing denominations to the Disciples of Christ, he was also ordained. And now he is an ordained disciples minister. He doesn't have a regular place for ministry, but kind of like what I do with music, he substitutes on Sundays and does Sunday supply. He'll preach, or he'll do organ substituting as well. And most recently, in around 2018, I believe, he was named executive director of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada. It's a wonderful organization, a very progressive organization of church musicians of many denominations, scholars, hymn text writers, professors, a very collegial organization that I'm also proud to be a part of. And I'm so proud to support him there. And they welcome us and other LGBTQ people and people of color with open arms in ways that I'm not really used to. I'm still, I guess, feeling a little bit of the PTSD of the Roman Catholic Church homophobia when I step into such a wonderful, inviting Christian community for whom that's not an issue. I'm like, wow, you know, it's wonderful. And so he's definitely found a home there.
Yeah. So you've not attended masses anymore, or church mass, Catholic mass?
So from going from anywhere from 6 to 7 masses a weekend to not having attended mass in several months, that's been very difficult. It's hit at me a lot spiritually. I was very, very involved in the Catholic Church. I was very involved with many dioceses and seeing the inner workings of how dioceses work. And, you know, when I sit through a sermon and I hear topics that are touched on that sadden me at best, completely offend me at worst, it makes me think twice about whether I want to log on to another Zoom Mass or not. Mm-hmm. At this point, my husband and I are looking for a community of faith where both of us can be involved in. I'm looking for a community of faith where I'll see representation, both as a member of the LGBTQ community and as a person of color. And that community also needs to be progressive minded enough to be able to accept us as a couple. That in itself, those prerequisites already narrow us down. So we're still searching. The pandemic hasn't helped at all. You can't really tell the vibrancy of a community from, a Zoom recorded service or even a Zoom live service. So hopefully when things start to open, my husband and I will continue going to different churches around the area and see if, for either of us, it's a good fit.
Well, Ray, I honestly, I can't imagine what it'd be like to lose your spiritual home like that.
Yeah.
It's I just can't imagine that.
Well, sometimes people ask me, so are you still Catholic? And my husband would answer differently than I do, but I still do. I think the Roman Catholic Church has a lot of significant flaws that speak directly to who I am. But it is the way, not only is it part of my history, it's part of my identity. I'm a Filipino Catholic. I came to understand even my culture through my religion, and I came to understand my religion through my culture. And I'm proud of that. For better or for worse, I sometimes say, you can't choose your family for better or for worse. I do think, though, that my Catholic family, the Catholic family that I grew up in, that I served for so many years, right now is a little too toxic. So I choose to remove that toxicity from my life.
Well, so I wanted to ask you if you could help us, speaking of being a more open and embracing church, could you talk to our congregation about what we could do to be more embracing of the LGBTQ community, as well as communities of color? Our church, I think I told you this before, we're largely white, predominantly white, and we live in a predominantly white area, but there are pockets of Asian Americans and others in our community. And I know that we're striving to be more open, but I'd love to hear from you. What would you suggest to us, how we might be more embracing and more open?
Well, that's a very good question. And I do want to say, even just the fact that you and your community are asking that, in my opinion, as somebody who's searching for a welcoming community of faith, just the fact that you're asking that question already makes me think, oh gosh, they really are in the right direction. Because for some people and for some communities, it's not even on their radar. So, but since you did pose that question, I guess I would like to approach that in not such concrete ways like, okay, well, let's develop a welcoming committee or let's do that, but rather in kind of taking into account our own disposition and our own attitude. And I would say that's twofold. Number one of the things that I always try and do, it's what I even said at the beginning of our conversation today, is I try and keep in mind the ways in which I am privileged, the privileges that I have. Remembering my privilege kind of is a reality check, and it keeps me humble. I think any community that remembers how they are privileged, and we, just by virtue of living in this country, just by virtue of living in a place like either me in Maryland or you in California, have oodles of privilege. And when we take that into consideration, when we realize that, I think it helps us be more aware and be more conscious of those who don't have these privileges, whether they be people from oppressed communities, from minority communities. I constantly think about that every day, or at least I try to. I think it's a good exercise, because I think that will help us kind of prepare our dispositions to be more ready to welcome others who may not be like us. And the other side of that, in terms of taking check of our attitudes and our dispositions, would be asking ourselves seriously, how open are we as individuals and as a community to be challenged and changed by other people who are not like us? Because I think it's when we recognize that in ourselves, how much am I really willing to learn from somebody whose sexuality is not my own, for somebody whose culture or language I may not understand? When we're able to come into contact with that part of ourselves that either puts up roadblocks to that, and then we're able to ask ourselves, okay, how do we move those roadblocks and allow ourselves to be moved and changed by others? Then I think our response of welcome only comes more naturally and authentically.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing those things with us, Ray. It's really helpful to us, and thank you for spending the time with us here today too. I hope that we will be able to continue our relationship. And if you're ever in California, up here in Northern California, you can come and play for us at the church. You can come and play the piano for us.
Well, I will tell you, I've listened to some of your Sunday services, and your music ministry team is outstanding.
Oh, thank you.
Outstanding. And I certainly will be visiting you when I get back to the Bay Area, because I love Walnut Creek.
Oh, wonderful. We look forward to having you, and we look forward to seeing you. So our friends out here, thank you for joining us today. And I want to remind you that this is the 10th interview that I've done since last May, and I hope you can get onto the website and look for the other interviews, and I know that you'll enjoy them all. So Ray, again, thank you so much again for being with us today, and Godspeed to you and Mike.
Thank you so much for having me. God bless.
You too.